Hey everybody, welcome back to Ichabod's house. We have the first episode of our Albert Fish series, and we're very, very excited about that. I am your host, Andy, here with Jen.
And I am here with my co-host, Andy. Hello, everyone.
We've been having some technical difficulties this morning, so my microphone, which is covered by a mitten, so it looks obscene, is on my lap, and I feel like I wasn't close enough. So that's why I was wondering. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Can you just open your mouth a little
Listen, it's
and
not
move
that kind
forward
of show.
back?
I'm going to expect a lot of money if I do that. The listeners are going to have to show me the money first before that happens, sister.
Oh my God.
Okay, I'm just going to put some books under here. Some more books. Okay. Oh, well, there we go. Look at that. Can her eyes right up to me?
It
Okay.
sure can, Andy.
It sure can. That's what she said.
It rose right on up.
Okay. So, anyway, we have a very disturbing episode and a couple more after this one about Albert Fish, but we're going to try to make it light and fun and in the most appropriate way possible, of course. So, anyway, we're going to start off with Google and Beyond, which I don't think we have any of. So, we don't, right? We're good with that.
We're good.
Okay. Ichabod's Nose.
I have been listening to a lot of Inner Sanctum, which is vintage radio, old radio from the 1940s. And it was, I think it aired weekly, but I don't know if my favorite thing about that show is the mysteries or the short little 30-minute vignettes of these horror, episodes, or if it's the commercials.
Oh.
As you're going through this, this host is always like, "We didn't see that coming, did we? That man is dead in a field. I wonder what will happen next." And then the woman who is reading for the sponsor will come on and say, "Oh, Mr. Host, I can't believe you would laugh at such an unfortunate happening as a man dead in a cornfield. You know, most people seeing a man in a cornfield would invite him inside and offer him a nice brisk tea of Lipton, or a nice hot cup of Lipton noodle soup. You can buy yours at the local grocery store because nothing says love like Lipton." So
And then they go back to the man in the cornfield who's dead.
you go back to the man in the cornfield. So
That's super fun. I like how dramatic they are in those.
Mhm. Yeah. And you can't see what's happening. So it's always like, "No, wait, put that gun down. Why are you pulling the hammer back? Why are you pulling the bang, bang? Oh my God, you pulled the trigger twice." Yeah, I don't know. Anyway.
I know. I love it. I think that's fun.
Yeah. Good stuff.
Well, I have been getting my Bridgerton on because there's a new chapter in that called Queen Charlotte, which I am loving.
For real.
It's so good, and I love Shonda Rhimes, of course. And yeah, so that's fabulous, and you will love episodes 2 and 3 of that. I'm just saying, might want to have somebody around that you can, I don't know, do some stuff with.
Okay.
It might get you breathing a little heavy. I'm just saying.
Or just dust off the toys in your night table,
Or
whatever.
you could whatever floats your boat.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So there we go. Okay. So I do need to talk about some sources for today.
Okay.
I got a lot of this information from encyclopedia.com, noyeshome.org, and the documentary on Amazon Prime called Albert Fish, In Sin He Found Salvation. Now, that documentary coincides with the book Albert Fish in His Own Words, excuse me, which we also cite later. But anyway, so those are our sources, not resources, sources for today.
All right. All right. Well, I'd like to say I'm excited, but I'm a little apprehensive about this series, but we'll just go ahead and get started, I guess.
Yes, let's dive in.
Last season, we brought you a few true crime stories about serial killer. Last season, we brought you a few true crime stories about serial killers and a cult. Dennis Nissen, Belle Gunness, and Michael Ryan of the Yahweh cult were gruesome stories. It's true. But none of them hold a candle to the most horrific serial killer we've ever heard of.
Worse than the Night Stalker, Jen?
Oh, worse.
Worse than Ed Gein?
Worse.
Worse than Jeffrey Dahmer, John Wayne Gacy, and Ted Bundy?
Andy, this guy was so bad that the devil himself probably didn't know if he should turn him away or bow to him.
Ugh. Oh, it's true, guys. And I can't believe Jen and I went this long without hearing about him. You guys might already know who he is, but I didn't until about a year ago. And that was the first time I heard about Albert Fish.
Yeah, and then you told me about him, and I agreed we needed to do an episode on him. We won't get as graphic as we have in the past because let's face it, there aren't enough palate cleansers to get us through this story. Not even a good Lipton tea audio commercial.
No,
Um,
it's not going to do it.
but it is a story that every true crime aficionado needs to know about.
Yeah, that's right. So let's go way back to when this first started. Hamilton Howard Fish was born in 1870. He later becomes Albert Fish, but he starts out as Hamilton Howard Fish, okay?
Okay. Okay.
There was quite a bit of age difference between his mother and his father, 43 years. And let me
Ugh,
tell you, there's 10 years difference between my husband and I. I can't imagine having a 43-year difference. I can't imagine that.
yeah.
When Fish was born, his father was 75 years old. Being of an advanced age, dear old dad dropped dead at the age of 80, leaving Hamilton to be raised with his 3 living siblings by his single mother. Little Hamilton was only 5 years old, and his mother made the gut wrenching decision to drop him off at an orphanage.
Okay, so let's unpack that just a bit. The year is 1875, which was a completely different time. According to encyclopedia.com, European and American women in the 19th century lived in an age characterized by gender inequality. At the beginning of the century, women enjoyed few of the legal, social, or political rights that are now taken for granted in Western countries. They couldn't vote, they couldn't sue or be sued, and they couldn't testify in court. They had extremely limited control over personal property after marriage and were rarely granted legal custody of their children in cases of divorce. They were also barred from institutions of higher education. And I'll tell you something else. A woman couldn't even get a credit card or apply for a loan until mid to late 20th century. She had to have her husband co-sign
Yep.
for her.
Yes, it's very disturbing
Yeah,
how that is. Yes. And they were also expected to remain subservient to their fathers and their husbands. Their occupational choices were also extremely limited. Middle and upper class women generally remained home, caring for their children and running the household. And it wasn't a choice. Like that's what they were expected to do. If they had money, she couldn't go out and work. That was a have to thing for the poor women. So if a woman wanted a career, she couldn't have one because she was expected to stay at home.
right.
And if a lower class woman wanted a career, well, she couldn't have one either because she didn't have the education or they just didn't want women in those positions. And she was probably doing laundry or prostitution or cleaning homes or something like that.
Right.
Yeah, lower class women often did work outside the home, but usually as poor paid domestic servants or laborers in factories and mills. And let's not forget that women couldn't even have their own checking account until 100 years later in 1974.
Oh my God, we did it again.
We did it
Where,
again. Oh my
oh my
God. I
God.
know, right?
Damn. Okay, so Mrs. Fish was in her 30s with 4 kids at home. The older children were probably expected to find work to support the family. This was also common at this time to see young children working in factories, selling goods in the streets, or hustling for money. We could debate the myriad reasons as to why she took little Hamilton to live at the orphanage, but hopefully it was that she thought he would be fed and given an education. Two things he would not get if he stayed at home with her.
But unfortunately, being in an orphanage with a bunch of nuns in the 1800s was most likely worse than living on the streets, if you can believe that.
Mm,
In my research, I found story after story of abuse and murder. Yes, murder, murder, Jen,
wait a
at orphanages. Mostly, um, yes, at these orphanages.
Okay, in the 1800s, there was a record number of children in orphanages, mostly in the Northeast and namely New York City, of course, because they had, Ellis Island and lots of immigrants coming in and
Yeah,
overcrowding. And uh, so many children lived in poverty with parents who abused alcohol, engaged in criminal activity, and were otherwise unfit parents. So some parents couldn't emotionally or physically take care of these kids and would take them to orphanages. These were the best case scenarios because if a parent got their shit together, they could go and get their kids from the orphanage and take them back home.
right. But many children weren't so lucky. They lost parents to the epidemics of typhoid, yellow fever, or the flu. So the children grew up in the orphanages if no relatives were able to take them. In New York City, there were so many children on the streets that an area around 10th Avenue was referred to as Misery Row. This was considered a hotbed for crime, poverty, and the rampant spread of disease. Going to an orphanage would certainly seem like a good option for a homeless, parentless child.
Ugh, these orphanages, though, were very dangerous places where rage filled, Bible obsessed nuns abused and sometimes tortured young children. According to a report called We Saw Nuns Kill Children, the Ghosts of St. Joseph's Catholic Orphanage, people who grew up in orphanages said they were made to kneel or stand for hours, sometimes with their arms straight out, sometimes holding their boots or some other item. They were forced to eat their own vomit. They were dangled upside down out windows, over wells, or in laundry chutes. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, children were locked in cabinets, in closets, in attics, sometimes for days, sometimes so long they were forgotten. They were told their relatives didn't want them, or they were permanently separated from their siblings. They were sexually abused. They were mutilated. One girl, Sally, testified about a time when she was 6 years old. She thinks that anyway, that she was 6 years old, because when you went to an orphanage, really everything about your identity was lost. So they didn't know when their birthdays were. So they just kind of had to grow up estimating when their birthday was and how old they were. They were never really told. So she had kind of aged out of the building that she was in, and so she was moving since she had turned 6. She was moving from the building that she was in to a building with some older girls, and so she was walking across the yard of the orphanage uh, compound, I guess, to another building, and she was being escorted by a nun. She heard the crash of a window breaking. She looked up, and a nun was standing in the fourth floor window of another building, and she had just thrown a boy out the window. He bounced on the ground. Yep, he bounced, and then, of course, just laid there.
Sally and the nun were the only two people out there to witness this. Sally looked up at the nun and said, Sister? The nun took hold of Sally's ear, turned her around, and walked her back to the other side of the yard. The nun told her she had a vivid imagination. We are going to have to do something about you, child. Ah ha 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 ha. In God's mercy.
Mhm.
Needless to say, the abuse that these children suffered was unimaginable, and the effects lasted the whole of their lifetimes. But they often suffered in silence. They rarely spoke about this stuff to anyone, often choosing to not let anyone know they had ever spent time in an orphanage.
Yeah, I think there was like a huge stigma around that. So they kind of like if you told people you were in prison, I'm sure you wouldn't go advertising that, right? And so they didn't ever talk about it. So I think it's safe to say that the majority of children who grew up in orphanages did not grow up to be serial killers or cannibals, because there were quite a lot of them. I'm just spitballing here, but I think that's a safe bet.
Mhm.
However, for little Hamilton Fish, later to be known as Albert, whatever synapses fired and connected in his brain were further stimulated by the abuses that he suffered, or rather, enjoyed at the
Ew.
orphanage. Yep.
Okay.
He dug his time there, Jen. He was completely into it at 5 years old.
That is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if you want to read about the specifics of the abuses he endured and willingly participated in, you can find it in the book Albert Fish in His Own Words by John Borowski. This is our main source for this series and is composed of all the interviews and private notes that Albert Fish himself wrote. For this episode, we will just say that sodomy happened to and was performed by Hamilton, little Albert, oral sex, whipping that often drew blood, and this was done by the nuns. And that's enough, right? Hamilton was there for a total of 2 years. His mother got a government job, and he was able to go back home. Several years later, his older brother came back from being in the service. He had traveled the world and told Hamilton all about it. His brother had seen savages and cannibals in China, and this fascinated Albert. Needless to say, his sexual encounters continued when he was in public school. He was also teased relentlessly. The kids called him ham and eggs.
So when he was 15, he decided he wanted to change his name. His mother said he could use the name of his deceased brother, Albert, who died with water on the brain. He was his mother's second child. When Albert was 24 in 1894, he went to New York City, and his first job was at Sanford Hall in Flushing, New York. It was a private sanitarium. Imagine that. He was just kind of drawn there. That sanitarium. He was there for about 2 years. It's not clear what his duties were, but he does say he was a painter by trade. So maybe they kept he just kept painting the sanitarium. I don't know.
He ended up getting married in 1898 to his first wife, Anna. He was 28 and she was 19. He held several different jobs working in both public and private homes. Albert said that his greatest delight was children. Oh, how he loved them. And he had 6 of his own. He also had 5 grandchildren and 8 stepchildren. He also writes, "Never can anyone say I ever harmed the hair of the head of any child. When I was arrested, police and others," oh, here we go. I want to do this differently. "Never can anyone say I ever harmed the hair of the head of any child. When I was arrested, police and others tried to make me confess to many other crimes. If I was to face my maker today, I can say that in confessing this one, I have cleared my soul. I lay the beginning of all my trouble to my wife."
I feel like you were channeling Nixon.
I am
I
not a
am not a
murderer.
crook.
I am not a murderer.
Okay, so it was the wife's fault, Jen. It was everything that he did was his wife's fault. Damn her. But we'll get back to that in a little bit. First, let's discuss his life while he was married to Anna. Albert believed strongly that marriage served one purpose. So long as the man and woman keep the bargain, they will both stay out of other trouble. I might have outside fancies, but would keep my end of the bargain, and fancies they would stay, nothing more. That's a complete lie, by the way.
Mhm.
However, his fancies were him living a double life. He was a traveling painter. This was his job. He moved from New York, and he would travel from New York all the way down over to Montana, wherever the work took him.
And he was able to prey on children this way. He would seduce them or bribe them with small sums of money and then attack them. His painter's clothes served two purposes. First, he could be nude in an instant. He wore nothing underneath his overalls. Secondly, the children he preyed on only saw him in the overalls, so if they saw him on the street in regular clothes, they wouldn't be able to recognize him.
He would have brutal experiences with some of these children, which would prompt him to move from one end of town to another or from one city to another once the word got out that he was doing this. He would never return to the same neighborhood. He said that he traveled to 23 different states with his painting and that he had children in every state.
Ugh. His goal was to elicit pain in someone else. Sadomasochism toward boys was his pleasure of choice. I've always had the desire to inflict pain on others and have others inflict pain on me. I always seem to enjoy everything that hurt. He met up with a teenage boy named Kedin or Kadan. For a period of 2 to 4 weeks or more, they performed sadist and masochist stuff on each other. Albert would go into trances for 5 or 6 days doing this stuff to the teenager and having him do it to him too. He wouldn't come out of it until he orgasmed 5 or 6 days later. Ooh, all I can imagine is the chafing. If it took me I'd give up after like
All right.
10 minutes. Dude, it's not going to happen this time.
Let's go get a sandwich, maybe regroup. I don't know. Meet up next week. This is not happening. But he also, and this poor kid, so he would keep him there with enticing him with money because it was just such a poor economy then. Um, and in the early 1900s and then all the way up until
Yeah.
he was caught, it was so poor, and so these children, that's how he would do it. He would entice them to come with him for with money or food. So that's why he was able to keep this kid there that long. So, but again, if you want to know specifics, you can read the book. I would suggest maybe not knowing the specifics. I've researched this a lot and still have nightmares about it, because that is just the very tip of the iceberg. What I have included here. So I've read it for you and can safely say to you, you do not want to know.
Mm-mm.
Just know it was some sick shit, okay? I will say, though, that at the end of their encounter, Albert did want to cut off the boy's penis, but at the last minute, he saw the boy's face once he started to cut and he couldn't do it. So he left the boy a $10 bill, left, and never saw him again. So there's that. And this all happened when he was married. So this whole thing of marriage was a bargain, I mean, it was just bullshit. I don't know. I guess maybe it reined him in a little bit because of the stuff that he did after they weren't married anymore or after she left or whatever, but yeah, he's just a sick man.
Sorry about your penis, kid. Here's a tenner for you.
Right. And $10 was a lot of money then.
It would have been a lot of money. So back to his behavior being the wife's fault. It all started around 1916 to 1917, kind of somewhere in that area. Albert was gone a lot painting, and so his wife took in a boarder to live with her and their 6 children. This boarder stayed up in the attic. One evening, she sent 5 of the 6 children to the movies. The youngest child was only 3 years old at the time. They go to the movies and come back, and everything is gone. Everything. Every knickknack, every spoon, every blanket. He mentioned there wasn't even a blanket for the 3-year-old to be wrapped in.
His oldest daughter sent a telegram that read, "Papa come home, Mama gone, house empty." He said he went home at once and rented a furnished apartment until they found a new home to begin all over again. His children were Albert H. Jr., 18, Anna, 16, Gertrude, 13, Eugene, 10, John, 7, and Henry, 3. He was advised to put the 3 youngest in a home. He had had enough of homes when he was a boy. He decided against it. He acted as both mother and father to all of his children, and he did care for them very well, Jen. He did not abuse his children at all.
Interesting. Well, thank God for that.
Yes, thank God for that. He did not do anything sexual, anything physical. He barely yelled at them. They all 6 of them said that what a wonderful father and grandfather he was.
Hmm. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, when he got home, a neighbor woman, I kind of messed up a little bit putting double names there. When he got home, a neighbor woman met him in the hall and said, "She's gone, Mr. Fish, and everything you had is gone with her." The kids were gone and everything was absolutely bare. She even took the stove. She took the 3-leaf maple table and 12 chairs and the sideboard and rug. A neighbor said that 10 minutes after they had all left for the movies, a van that was waiting down the street moved up to the door and John Straub showed up. That was the border. The van men and Straub moved every stick out of the house and drove off. And then the wife left too.
Okay, so um, she abandoned all of her children.
Yes. Yes, she
Wow.
did. For this border.
Okay. Well, the next day, Albert discovered that his wife, Anna, had not only taken absolutely every possession they had, including the stove, but she sold it all. It was enough to get Anna and Straub to the Connecticut border. So she not only had an affair with the border, but she ran off with him. You'd think it would end there, right? No, of course not. That's too easy. About 3 years later, the three youngest children came down with the measles, and Anna found out about it. She ended up writing to their daughter, Anna. Straub can't get a job. Straub can't get a job, and your mother is literally starving up here with her two new babies. I've heard about Jean and Gert and Johnny having the measles, and if your father isn't too mad at me, I would come back simply as a housekeeper and work for my keep and work hard. Only one thing you are to tell him. If he takes me in, I have to bring these two babies with me, but not Straub. Well, he took her back in. He trusted her. And she ended up sneaking back in and had him in the attic like she did when he was a boarder. Albert found out and kicked them both out. She had some balls. Albert bounced back, though. He was busy playing Dirty Casanova in the matrimonials.
That's the part of the paper that where they put ads in.
Oh, oh, oh.
Uh-huh.
He would write ladies whom he felt would be interested in this type of quality time. It's like Belle Gunness.
Yeah.
I'm
Yes.
I make a very good cream pudding. Yeah. Dear Miss Blank. Dear Miss Blank, I am a widower of some means. I have a son of 19, and he is a semi invalid. He cannot walk, run, jump, get in and out of the bathtub without assistance.
Yeah, so he's using his quote unquote son to get dates or to get his kicks. Obviously, he's lying here. He would request a paddle and a cat of nine tails. He invented his son Bobby. Bobby was really Albert, of course, but he couldn't come out and say that. Bobby had to be babied and tended night and day, and by me, who had six other real children. So out would come the whip and strap, and he would get what for. I believe those beatings I experienced. Oh, I should probably read this as him. Bobby had to be babied and tended night and day, and by me, who had six other real children. So out would come the whip and strap, and he would get what for. I believe those beatings I experienced were the origin of the habit I contracted later on of sticking needles into myself. The trouble with pain is you get tough and always have to invent something that hurts worse.
Albert Fish claims he is a man of passion. He stated, I am a man of passion. You don't know what that means, unless you are my kind. At the orphanage where they put me just before Garfield was assassinated, there were some older boys that caught a horse in a sloping field. They got the horse up against a fence down at the bottom of the field and tied him up. An old horse. They put kerosene on his tail and lit it and cut the rope, and away went the old horse, busting through the fences to get away from the fire. But the fire went with him. That horse, it's me. That's the man of passion. The fire chases you and catches you, and then it's in your blood. And after that, it's the fire that has control, not the man. Blame the fire for the passion. Blame the fire of passion for what Albert H. Fish has done. And vote for me, 2024.
Yeah, so basically, he was a man of passion, and that fire of passion is what drove all of his depravity, which led to his crimes and sexual sadism and masochism and all the other perversions with which he was diagnosed. Passion. So, but he did other crimes. So let's just take a minute here and look at these. When he was 16, he was arrested for cashing a forged check for $35. The charges were discharged. Passion. In 1903, aged 32, he was the manager of a grocery store in Long Island. He was arrested for embezzlement. He served 18 months in Sing Sing. Passion.
Passion. Lying in my bed at night. Passion. Rod Stewart had nothing on Albert Fish.
Nothing.
In 1922, age 52, he was arrested for false check writing for the total of $67. The charge was reduced to petty larceny and was suspended. Passion. In 1930, at age 60, he wrote a check for cash for $300. It was reduced to petty larceny and the sentence was suspended. Passion. In 1929, he was arrested for sending obscene letters. Passion. Federal Judge Knox sentenced him. I'm feeling so passionate, I'm having trouble. Federal Judge Knox sentenced him to probation for 6 months and sent him to Bellevue Hospital. Passion. Lastly, in 1931, at age 61, the same charges again, but this time Albert was discharged home into the custody of his married daughter after spending 3 weeks in Kings County Hospital. Passion.
It is hard to tell, other than his time in the orphanage, what led to him becoming this man of passion.
Passion.
His father was just a general businessman, and he was married twice. Albert was his father's 12th child. He was his mother's fifth. And as we stated earlier, he was 5 when his father died. So, yes, I mean, that's impactful, but I don't think that that's impactful enough to make you commit these crimes.
No. Getting raped repeatedly and beaten in an orphanage and would probably, impact you more than your father passing away at age 5.
Agreed. But like I said, there were all of these kids were raped and abused. And I'm sure it had maybe questionable morals or something, but he's the one that he took it to the next level. He was 33 when his mother passed away. At the age of 3, he was diagnosed with St. Vitus's dance, or Sydenham chorea, which is I should have given this part to you, neuropsychiatric manifestation of rheumatic fever with an incidence varying from 5% to 35%. It may occur alone or concurrently? Is that what I wanted to write there? With other manifestations of rheumatic fever. He was known to often wring his hands. Jen, you want to break that down for us?
So I don't know about this one specifically, but chorea is an involuntary movement of the body. It's a almost dance-like or snake-like movements. And there's Huntington's chorea, which is hereditary and awful, but it's involuntary jerks or twitches of the body. I'll have to look up Sydenham, and I can give you a little more on that next time we get together.
Okay. Yeah. So that's what he had. And apparently you don't grow out of it, because as we get more into this, you'll see that could have been a very identifying mark or trait or identifying characteristic of him, but nobody took it seriously.
Okay.
So took the description of him seriously as a bad guy. So
wild. Okay, so let's get back to his passion. There's a lot we'll get into in the next episode regarding his crimes, but here's just a bit of what this man of passion was all about. 1929 at Dr. Lamb's on a Sunday afternoon, away from the asylum. I had a boy of 14 or 15. I was leading him up there with the purpose to kill him and cut him up. I would have intended to first use him from behind, and then hit him on the head with a stone, and then get the implements and cut what I wanted and leave the rest out there. Well, a number of automobiles came along while I was still looking for the proper place. If it hadn't been for the passing autos, I would have killed him. Vote fish 2024.
He also stated that he often, while whipping children, had a desire to keep it up and whip them to death, as he had read of this being done. He had taken a girl of about 14 when he was in an Eastern home painting. And that's all they said. It was just an Eastern home. So I don't know if that was Eastern New York or what.
Okay.
He had her and intended to violate her and whip her, but there was a young man who had a master key to this home, and then he showed up to the flat. Albert put the girl in a closet and placed a 50-pound paint pail in front of it. The young man said he had heard things and he felt like kicking him out. So the girl was saved because
So
of
the
that.
girl was saved.
Died.
And
Mm-hmm.
so made fish leave and then I assume let
Yep.
her out of the closet.
Yep.
Jesus. At the age of 17, Albert had a boy of about 12 and he kept him for a few days. He had him and he whipped him, urinated on him, ate his peanut butter,
Mm-hmm.
and had the boy do the same to him. He said he would have whipped him till he was unconscious and then cut him up alive. From reading the Peary expedition is where he first got the desire to taste human flesh. The papers in Washington stated that in the Peary expedition, 3 members of the crew had been eaten. It gave the details. The one who drew the shortest straw was chosen.
And I should have looked that. I remember that, but was it the Peary expedition or was it something else?
I don't know.
I'm
Google and
gonna
beyond.
I'm gonna Google and beyond that for next week because I meant to look that up to see if it was actually called the Peary expedition because I know there was something that um uh something like that happened, but I didn't remember
Mm.
being called Peary. Okay, so it could have been the orphanage, his brother's story about China, or hearing about the Peary expedition that gave Albert his passion. I guess we'll never know. However, we do know that his passion was more of what is called perversion and only served to make himself happy. He was diagnosed with numerous conditions while once he was arrested. It's interesting that he was able to fool the doctors when he was sentenced to stay at the hospital. So he was at the hospital, he was at 2 hospitals, and they did testing on him, and he was able to fool them and say that nothing was wrong. Once he was arrested, however, and the authorities knew it was him who murdered Grace Budd, which is the famous which is the murder that he's famous for.
Okay.
The doctors were not fooled anymore.
Okay, so let's do a quick rundown of his perversions because that sounds like a great time and I'm excited to be a part of reading this off.
I'm I am so glad that it's you that's going to read them.
Yeah. Sadism, masochism, active and passive flagellation, self-castration and castration, exhibitionism, voyeuristic acts, picure acts, pedophilia, homosexuality, penilingio or fellatio, cunnilingus, analingus, coprophagia, undinism, fetishism, cannibalism, and hypereroticism. Anyway, we're going to leave it here for today. And next week, we're going to get into the kidnapping and murder of Grace Budd and the 2 little boys Albert Fish confessed to murdering.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting episode and one that will make you a bit mad, honestly. But it's good.
Mm.
It's good to know about. You'll ask yourself, how could the parents allow this or that, which ultimately led to her death and the little boys as well? There's a lot of disbelief that you'll experience. Definitely worth a listen. I mean, it's going to be better than Dateline.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah.
I'm a little mortified and excited for next week's episode or next
Mhm.
2 weeks episode. So we want to thank everybody for tuning in today. You really make every episode awesome and we all love you.
Please reach out to us on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. We love hearing from you guys.
Until next time, remember, Ichabod loves you.
Carry a flashlight and always bring extra pants.
Passion.